Have you ever got into one of those conversations about music where someone asks if you like the Beatles, and if you respond with anything other than a frenzy of quivering agreement, they get all indignant at you and they'll say something like, well, do you like, I don't know, Nirvana or Oasis or Pink Floyd or the Pixies, because none of them would have existed without the Beatles. And you think to yourself, well, if the Beatles hadn't have come along and invented pop music as we know it, then someone else probably would have done. And whoever that someone else would have been, they probably wouldn't have shaken their fringes around every time they hit a high note either. And look, I only bring it up because Doom is the games industry's Beatles, isn't it? It's such an important moment in the medium that it's easy to imagine there was just nothing before it came out, just black screens on PCs worldwide. And it's probably true that if id Software's famous Johns, Carmack and Romero, hadn't invented the first-person shooter and deathmatch and modding and, I'm getting distracted, if they hadn't invented all that, someone else would have. But that way of thinking does Doom a massive disservice. Because I think Doom really is that special. Not just because it got there first with so many important milestones, but because of how it did it. This is a game we're still celebrating and playing and making new levels for nearly 30 years after its release. It might be the single best example of a perfectly executed creative vision that we have in games, and like the Beatles, it's the result of a partnership between two talented creative visionaries with totally different approaches. It's one of those rare, lightning strike type pop culture phenomenon, a perfect coming together of so many different factors that when you stop to think about it, it seems incredible that it ever happened. So, let's just immerse ourselves in the time and the place. An early 90s bursting with gratuitously violent action cinema, thrash metal, and a burgeoning game scene. And remember why Doom left the giant crater in the landscape that it did. Let's start by stating the incandescently obvious and acknowledging that Doom wouldn't have happened if John Carmack hadn't met John Romero. These two are often characterised as totally opposite personalities who counterbalanced each other perfectly, just like Lennon and McCartney, the Gallagher brothers, Pete and Carl. Two visionaries who could stand each other just long enough to change the face of the medium forever, before eventually going their separate ways. So the story goes, Romero hired the talented young programmer Carmack for his PC gaming division at Softdisk in 1990, along with designer Tom Hall and artist Adrian Carmack, who incredibly isn't related to John, and the four of them founded id Software in 1991. Having run off to form their own company, they put out Commander Keen, Wolfenstein 3D, and its sequel Spear of Destiny before Doom. And during that period, the archetypes of the two Johns started to form. Carmack was the studious programmer, fascinated by the tiny technical details, always pushing the limits of hardware and code. Romero, brash and long-haired, was the maverick designer who was more interested in pushing the limits of taste and decency, shocking people while he wowed them with Doom's design. That knack for courting controversy was crucial for id too. This was the early 90s, controversy was basically a mandatory marketing beat. An 18 certificate on your film or game just meant extra cool points, and if you managed to create immoral panic in the papers while you're at it, all the better. This was the era of video nasties and Mary Whitehouse, and of an anti-establishment youth culture that had grunge and trance in its soundtrack. Screw the establishment, bring on the shock value. And crikey, did Doom have some shock value. Romero doubled down on the kickback to Wolfenstein 3D's scandalised complaints by including death animations, jibs, chainsaw kills, and death screams in Doom. Aside from the gore, there was also all the devilish imagery, the demons from hell, the goat skulls and the horned monsters. This felt genuinely edgy at the time. Games just hadn't been pushing the boundaries like this before, least of all in such an unashamedly violent title. Maybe it's an oversimplification, but from the outside looking in, it seems like Romero had the vision of a game that would capture our darkest imaginations, and Carmack had the ability to make an engine for all those ideas to live in. Adrian Carmack and Tom Hall deserve to be remembered as a part of the very tight creative unit too, but Hall's decision to leave it in 1993 before Doom was released consigns him to lower billing. And Adrian Carmack just doesn't seem to have sought out the limelight like the two Johns in their Ferraris lapping up all the attention. These were rock stars who happened to make video games, and their personalities formed the basis of Doom's marketing. Maybe you think it's the shooting, or the graphics, or the way the cacodemons sort of deflate when you shoot them. But to me, the single greatest achievement id Software pulled off with Doom was how absolutely expertly they pulled in the right pop culture elements of the time. It just is 1993, digitally reconstructed and frozen in time to enjoy forever. The early 90s were a golden age of action, sci-fi and horror cinema, all of which enjoyed the best practical effects we'd ever see on screen. You know, before all that weightless CG guff kicked in. And these were the pre-internet days when we consumed media as a monoculture. We all read the same magazines and saw the same shows, so basically everybody had seen Terminator 2, Aliens and Hellraiser, because those magazines and shows were talking about them. And that gave the early 90s a really distinct pop culture vibe. It was the same with music. Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth and the like. Well, they weren't quite mainstream compared to Michael Jackson, but Metallica's Black Album had 5 top 40 singles on it. Considering thrash metal was seen as so extreme at the time, it was remarkably visible in everyday life. There were posters on walls, cassette tapes in school bags. You knew about metal in 1993 even if you weren't into it. It wasn't hidden away in a subreddit. Now, just listen to the first level music in Doom's soundtrack. It's basically a MIDI master of puppets, but that's fine. It's better than fine actually. It works perfectly in the context of Doom's cyber hell, just like its cinematic influences like Terminator's menacing robotics, Aliens' far-flung abandoned facilities, and Hellraiser's gory horror. It all just sort of comes together and then creates this place. It's otherworldly and fearsome, and at the same time totally in sync with our pop culture interests at the time. It took a series of fantastic decisions to make that happen. We can't talk about Doom without mentioning its many, many technical innovations, and that's almost a shame in a way, because although its many firsts proved absolutely instrumental in making such a smash, well, I mean, very few of us actually know about game engines like John Carmack does, least of all me, so we can only recount the same time-honoured anecdotes without really understanding what it meant to see things in a different way and turn lines of code into a totally new experience than we'd ever played before 1993. Sorry. So very quickly, without any technical insight into how they all came about, here were some of those big breakthroughs in id Tech 1, the Doom engine.
Stairs, diagonal walls, animated textures, elevators, textured floors and ceilings. Those horrible moments when all the lights go out without warning and you have to fight off monsters in the dark.
And it wasn't just that Doom looked great and that we all had our minds blown by being able to go upstairs. The legacy's more profound than that. First-person shooters became the flag carriers for better graphics for years afterwards. If you want to see the most gorgeous visuals and the most advanced physics, even today, FPS games are your first port of call. Doom placed the shooter at the epicenter of the games industry, and in many ways, it still occupies pride of place today. Just to recap then, it was a technical marvel that perfectly captured our pop culture interests at the time and interweaved them in a way that we'd never experienced before in a burgeoning medium that still felt new and exciting. Oh, and you could play a huge chunk of it for a total of £0 and 0 pence. Maybe you don't remember shareware. Shareware was like a demo disc in the throes of a mad fit of generosity, where instead of giving you a tantalising 10 minutes or so of a game to get you to buy the rest, huge chunks of it were available absolutely free. In Doom's case, about 1/3 of the game. See this capture here? You probably don't recognise it because it doesn't come from Doom's first episode, Knee Deep in the Dead. No, this is from the 3rd episode, Inferno, and the reason it looks unfamiliar is that this wasn't the bit id Software were giving away for nothing. Almost everything you see of Doom comes from Knee Deep in the Dead, because absolutely everybody in the world played it. Really. At one point, it was installed on more machines than Windows 95, which prompted Bill Gates to actually look into buying id Software. But the point is, shareware made this incredible game spread like wildfire. It meant that simple word of mouth was enough to convince people to spend hours downloading the game or buying magazines that came with Doom's first episode on floppy disks. We saw something similar with Fortnite recently, making a game that's different and captures the time and innovates. That's all wonderful and everything, but then giving it away effectively for free, that is when a pop culture phenomenon happens. So thank you, early 90s distribution models. Thank you for making this happen. Thank you not just for putting Doom in front of enough people to popularise PC gaming and first-person shooters, but also for letting id Software make enough money out of it that they could continue making trailblazing games for years to come. I remember the first time I saw a box copy of Doom in my local electronics boutique a few years after it came out, and it was honestly like looking at a famous museum artefact or a masterpiece painting. By the time it came to shipping boxed copies, Doom's logo and artwork were already instantly recognisable, and it became a kind of shorthand for a forbidden and adult world to my adolescent brain. Honestly, look at that box and tell me you don't feel something at least. For me, it's the iconography of what bigger boys got up to in my school, the gateway to a world of imagined grown-up games on my PC whose violence and adultness I could only guess at. For you, it might be a failed degree or 200 consecutive nights without proper sleep because you were up playing it, or that Alien 3 was you made. But it definitely leaves an imprint, doesn't it? Right, thanks for watching everyone. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and let us know...
Oi! You've not mentioned deathmatches or modding.
Oh, stop being so bloody brilliant, Doom! Honestly, it's a problem when you're making a video like this because there's just too much to talk about. Even the fact that we're mentioning the invention of Deathmatch multiplayer as an afterthought is ridiculous, but here we are. It's believed John Romero first coined the term Deathmatch during Doom's development, and boy howdy was he excited about it. The single-player levels were fantastic, sure, but for the first time here was the opportunity to take those skills navigating a 3D space in first person, aiming and shooting, and then employ them on other actual human beings live on the internet. Needless to say, it proved pretty popular. There are legends of entire university campus server networks crashing because so many people were playing Doom Deathmatch. And let's see you in the comments if you ever played it in your IT rooms in school every lunchtime. As if id hadn't already guaranteed Doom's place as a cultural milestone in the 90s, Deathmatch absolutely cemented it. So, there we have it. 5 reasons Doom changed everything, although honestly we could have written about 100 more. Let us know what you think in the comments, leave us a like if you enjoyed the video, and remember to subscribe to Logitech G for more like this. We'll catch you next time.